The morning light filtered through the metal windows of Colony Station Omega 7 as Kim Day prepared for another day of work. His hands moved slowly as he gathered his tools, checking each one carefully before placing it in his worn leather bag. The settlement had been his home for 15 years now, ever since he and his wife had decided to start fresh on the outer rim. She had died when their son Park Tae was only 7, leaving Day to raise the boy alone. Day was 60 years old now, with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too much hardship. He worked as a maintenance engineer for the station, keeping the life support systems running and the power flowing. It was honest work that paid enough to feed his son and keep a small apartment. In the human quarter was the oldest part of the station with narrow corridors and cramped living spaces, but it was home. Park Tae was 17 now and looked more like his mother every day. He had her sharp eyes and quick mind, though he had learned from his father to keep those qualities hidden. The boy attended the local academy where he studied basic engineering and repair work like most human children. The other species in the Galactic Union saw humans as barely intelligent, enough for simple labor, and Day had taught his son never to prove them wrong. The station buzzed with activity as different alien species went about their daily business. The Zentari, with their blue skin and 4 arms, dominated the commercial sector, selling goods from across the galaxy. The insect-like Vrex controlled most of the shipping and transportation, their chittering voices echoing through the cargo bays. The tall, pale Etherians ran the administrative offices, looking down on everyone else with their glowing white eyes. Humans were at the bottom of this social order. They cleaned the floors, served the food, and fixed the machines when they broke. Nobody expected much from them, and that was exactly how Day preferred it. He had learned long ago that drawing attention was dangerous for his kind. Better to stay quiet, work hard, and hope the more powerful species would leave them alone. This morning, Day kissed his son goodbye and headed to the engineering section. The main power coupling had been acting up again, and he needed to run diagnostics before the morning shift change. Park Tae grabbed his school bag and walked in the opposite direction toward the academy. His father had made him promise to keep his grades average, not too low to get in trouble, but never high enough to stand out. The academy was a mixed facility where young beings from different species learned together. Humans usually sat in the back and spoke only when spoken to. Park Tae had friends among the other human students, but he was careful not to get too close to anyone. The Galactic Union had rules about fraternization between species, and breaking those rules could get a family exiled or worse. Park Tae was good at hiding his true abilities. His teachers thought he was a decent student who tried hard but lacked the natural intelligence of the other species. They had no idea that he could solve complex equations in his head, or that he understood the station computer systems better than most engineers. He had learned to make small mistakes on purpose to keep his test scores in the acceptable range for a human. During lunch, Park Tae sat with Min Ho and Sung Jin, 2 other human boys who shared his cautious approach to life. They talked quietly about sports and girls and the latest news from Earth. They never discussed politics or their treatment by the other species. Everyone knew the walls had ears, and the wrong conversation could bring unwanted attention from the authorities. The afternoon brought news that made everyone nervous. Commander Vex Thorne of the Hegemony Guard was coming to the station for a routine inspection. The Hegemony was the military arm of the Galactic Union, and their soldiers were feared throughout known space. They were reptilian warriors who stood 8 feet tall with scales like armor and teeth like daggers. Thorne was known for his cruelty and his particular dislike of humans. Day heard the news while he was working on the power coupling. His hands trembled slightly as he tightened the final connection. The Hegemony inspections were supposed to be routine, but they often turned violent, especially when humans were involved. He made a mental note to warn Park Tae to stay out of sight until the soldiers left. The station administrator, a nervous Zentari named Crix, sent word that all residents should go about their normal business during the inspection. Nobody was to approach the Hegemony soldiers or speak to them unless directly questioned. Any violation of protocol would result in immediate detention. The message was clear. Stay invisible and hope for the best. As evening approached, Day finished his work and headed home through the main corridor. The station felt different now, with everyone walking a little faster and speaking in hushed tones. The usual bustling energy had been replaced by a tense quiet that made his skin crawl. He could see Zentari merchants closing their shops early and Vrex workers scurrying to complete their tasks. Park was already home when his father arrived, cooking a simple meal of rice and vegetables in their tiny kitchen. The boy had learned to cook when he was 12, taking over most of the household duties so his father could work longer hours. They ate in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts about the coming inspection. After dinner, they sat together on their small couch, watching the news feeds from other parts of the galaxy. The reports were the same as always: conflicts between species, trade disputes, and territorial claims. Humans were mentioned only as casualties or refugees, never as participants in the larger events that shaped galactic civilization. Day looked at his son and felt a familiar mixture of pride and fear. Park was growing into a fine young man, despite the hardships they had faced. But Day knew the boy had gifts that could get them both killed if anyone discovered them. Sometimes late at night he would see Park working on his school tablet, his fingers moving faster than should be possible, solving problems that were supposed to be beyond human understanding. The old man had his own secrets, of course. During the war 20 years ago, he had served in the human resistance movement, working to free colony worlds from hegemony occupation. He had seen things and done things that still haunted his dreams, but those days were behind him now. His only concern was keeping his son safe in a galaxy that saw humans as expendables. They prepared for bed. Day reminded Park to keep his head down tomorrow. The hegemony soldiers would be looking for any excuse to cause trouble, and humans were always easy targets. The boy nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. He had lived his entire life under the shadow of more powerful species and knew how to make himself invisible. Neither father nor son could sleep that night. The station hummed around them with the sound of life support systems and distant machinery. They lay in their bed staring at the ceiling and wondering what tomorrow would bring. The hegemony inspection would change everything for their small family, though neither of them could imagine how completely their quiet lives were about to be shattered. Commander Vex Thorn arrived at Colony Station Omega-7 with his squad of 12 elite hegemony soldiers. The transport ship docked at the main port with a hiss of hydraulics and the heavy clank of metal on metal. The soldiers emerged in full battle armor, their reptilian forms towering over the station personnel who had gathered to greet them. Thorn stood nearly 9 feet tall, his green scales reflecting the harsh lights of the docking bay. His yellow eyes swept over the crowd with obvious disdain, taking in the mixed collection of species that called the station home. His armor was black and silver, marked with the symbols of his rank and decorated with trophies from conquered worlds. Station Administrator Crix stepped forward, his forearms trembling as he offered the traditional greeting the Zentari had prepared for this moment, for weeks making sure every protocol was followed perfectly. He spoke in the formal language of the Galactic Union, welcoming the commander and offering whatever assistance he might need. Thorn barely acknowledged the greeting, instead barking orders to his soldiers in their harsh native tongue. The hegemony troops spread out through the docking bay, their heavy boots echoing on the metal deck plates. Each soldier carried weapons that could level a building and wore armor that could stop most small arms fire. They were the elite of the Galactic Union military, trained from birth to fight and conquer. The inspection began immediately, with Thorn demanding to see security records, maintenance logs, and personnel files. He questioned the department heads with brutal efficiency, looking for any sign of weakness or non-compliance. His soldiers searched random cargo containers, opened sealed packages, and interrogated workers without explanation. Day had been working in the lower maintenance section when the soldiers arrived. He tried to stay out of their way, continuing his routine checks on the environmental systems. The power coupling he had repaired yesterday was holding steady, and the atmospheric processors were running at optimal levels. He hoped to finish his shift without encountering any hegemony personnel, but fate had other plans. As Day carried his tool bag through the main corridor toward the next workstation, he rounded a corner and walked directly into Commander Thorn. The impact sent his tools scattering across the deck plates, the metal pieces ringing against the floor like broken bells. Thorn staggered backward, his massive form surprisingly unsteady from the collision. His yellow eyes blazed with instant fury as he looked down at the small human who had dared to touch him. The other soldiers immediately raised their weapons while nearby aliens scrambled to get out of the way. Day dropped to his knees immediately, his hands shaking as he tried to gather his scattered tools. He spoke in the most humble tone he could manage, apologizing over and over in both human language and broken Galactic standard. His heart pounded as he felt the commander eyes burning into him like laser beams. The collision had been completely accidental, but Thorn saw it as a deliberate insult. From his perspective, this pathetic human had purposely struck him, in front of his soldiers and a crowd of witnesses. Such disrespect could not be tolerated, especially from one of the lowest species in the Union. Thorn kicked the tools away from D's hands, sending them sliding across the deck. His voice was a low growl that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest as he spoke. "You dare touch me, human. Do you think your worthless life gives you the right to assault a hegemony commander?" Day kept his head down, his voice barely above a whisper as he continued to apologize. He explained that it was an accident, that he had not seen the commander coming around the corner. He begged for forgiveness, promising it would never happen again. His words came out in a rush of panic and fear. But Thorn was not interested. In apologies, he had been looking for an excuse to demonstrate hegemony power, and this pathetic human had given him the perfect opportunity. The crowd was growing as workers and residents stopped to watch the confrontation. They would all witness what happened to those who showed disrespect to their betters. The first blow came without warning. Thorn's massive fist struck Day across the face, sending the old man sprawling. The crowd gasped, but no one moved to help. The commander stepped forward, his clawed feet clicking on the metal deck as he prepared to deliver more punishment. Park Tae had been walking home from the academy when he heard the commotion in the main corridor. He pushed through the crowd of onlookers and felt his blood turn to ice when he saw his father on the ground bleeding from a split lip. Commander Thorn stood over him like a predator toying with wounded prey. The boy wanted to rush forward to help his father, but years of training held him back. Day had taught him that direct confrontation with authority was suicide for humans. Better to endure humiliation than to provoke a massacre. Park Tae clenched his fists and forced himself to stay still even as his heart broke, watching his father being brutalized. Thorn grabbed Day by the front of his work shirt and hauled him to his feet. The old man's weight barely registered to the massive alien who held him like a child might hold a broken toy. The commander voice carried clearly through the corridor as he began his speech about human worthlessness. "You parasites exist only because we allow it." Thorn snarled, his breath hot against Day's face. "Your entire species serves at our pleasure. You clean our floors, you fix our machines, and you stay out of our way. That is the natural order of things. And when you forget your place, we remind you." Another blow sent Day staggering backward, blood streaming from his nose. The crowd watched in silence. Some aliens looking amused while others simply seemed bored by the display only. The humans showed any real distress, but they were too frightened to intervene. Park Tae felt something cold and terrible growing inside his chest as he watched his father being beaten. The old man had spent his entire life protecting his son, teaching him to survive in a hostile galaxy by staying invisible. Now Day was paying the price for that philosophy, taking a beating he could not win, simply because fighting back would mean death. Thorn struck again and again, his massive fists landing with sickening thuds against Day's ribs and stomach. The old man doubled over, gasping for air, but still did not fight back. He absorbed each blow with the patience of someone who knew that resistance would only make things worse. The beating continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Thorn seemed to take pleasure in the slow, methodical nature of the punishment, making sure each strike was calculated for maximum pain without causing immediate death. Wanted the human to suffer to understand his place in the galactic hierarchy. Finally, Day collapsed, unable to stand. The commander looked down at the broken man and laughed, a sound like grinding metal that echoed through the corridor. He turned to address the crowd, making sure his words would be remembered and repeated throughout the station. "Let this be a lesson to all of you," Thorn announced, his voice carrying easily over the murmur of the crowd. "Humans are nothing. They exist to serve, and, when they forget that we remind them, the hegemony maintains order in this galaxy. and that order depends on everyone knowing their place. Park Tae watched his father struggle to breathe, blood pooling beneath his face. The boy's hands trembled with suppressed rage as the alien soldiers laughed and joked about human weakness. None of them noticed the change in his eyes, the cold calculation that was replacing the fear. Something was awakening inside Park Tae, something his father had taught him to keep buried. The humiliation was complete. Tae lay broken and bleeding while his son watched helplessly from the crowd. Commander Thorne had made his point about human inferiority, and now prepared to move on to other parts of his inspection. But he had made one crucial mistake in his brutal display of power. He had not noticed the quiet human boy whose world had just been shattered. Park Tae stood frozen in the crowd, watching blood pool beneath his father's face. The old man breathing was shallow and labored, his ribs probably broken from Commander Thorne's methodical beating. The boy had lived his entire life following his father, teachings about staying invisible, about avoiding conflict with the more powerful species. Now those teachings crumbled like dust as he saw the price of submission. Thorne was not finished. He grabbed Tae by the hair, hauling the semi-conscious man back to his knees. The commander seemed energized by the violence, his yellow eyes bright with sadistic pleasure. He looked around at the crowd, making sure everyone was watching as he prepared to deliver more punishment. This is what happens when humans forget their place. The commander announced, his voice echoing through the corridor. Your species exists only to serve us. You have no rights, no dignity, and no value beyond your ability to perform simple tasks. When you fail, at even that, we dispose of you like broken machinery. The alien soldiers laughed at their commander words. Some of the non-human spectators nodded in agreement, while others simply watched with bored expressions. They had seen this kind of display before. The hegemony made examples of troublemakers regularly, and humans were always easy targets. Tae tried to speak, to apologize again, but Thorne struck him across the mouth, silencing him. The old man's head snapped back and more blood flowed down his chin. He swayed, on his knees, barely able to remain upright. His eyes found his son in the crowd, and Park Tae saw the message there. Stay back, stay safe. Do not make yourself a target. But something had changed inside Park Tae. The careful control his father had taught him was slipping away, replaced by a cold fury that seemed to freeze his blood. The boy felt his consciousness expanding, touching systems and networks he had trained himself to ignore. His fingers twitched as if typing on an invisible keyboard. The crowd expected him to cower like the other humans, to watch his father beating with the same helpless acceptance that defined their species. Instead, Park Tae took a step forward, then another. His movement was slow and deliberate, cutting through the press of bodies like a knife through water. Thorne noticed the approaching boy and paused in his assault. He looked down at Park Tae with amusement, expecting to see fear or desperation. Instead, he found himself staring into eyes that held something he had never seen in a human before: cold calculation, mixed with absolute certainty, as if the boy was looking at a problem that had already been solved. Stop, the young human said. His voice was quiet, but it carried clearly through the corridor. The single word fell into the silence like a stone into still water. Thorne blinked, surprised by the audacity of this small creature who dared to give him commands. The commander, massive form, straightened to his full height, towering over the 17-year-old human. His soldiers shifted their weapons slightly, not quite raising them but making their presence known. The crowd murmured with shocked whispers. Nobody spoke to hegemony officers that way, especially not humans. Thorne laughed, a sound like grinding metal that echoed off the corridor walls. He released Tae, who collapsed forward onto his hands and knees, gasping for breath. The commander turned his full attention to this new source of entertainment, gesturing for his soldiers to watch the show. What did you say to me, boy? Thorne growled, his voice dripping with menace. Did this pathetic creature just give me an order? Do you think you have some kind of authority here? Some power that makes you my equal, Park? Tae did not answer. Immediately, he was too busy feeling the networks around him responding to his presence. Every computer system, every communication device, every piece of electronic equipment was suddenly aware of his consciousness touching their processes. The sensation was intoxicating after years of keeping these abilities hidden. You made a mistake, Park Tae said finally. His voice remained calm despite the magnitude of what was happening inside his mind. The networks were opening to him like flowers blooming. In sunlight security systems, traffic control, life support, atmospheric processing, they were all connected and they were all his to command. Thorn's eyes narrowed as he studied this strange human boy. Something was wrong here. The kid showed no fear, no submission. He stood perfectly still with an eerie confidence that made even the battle-hardened commander feel uneasy. There was something in the air, something that made the scales along Thorn's spine prickle with instinctive alarm. The soldiers felt it too, though they could not identify what was making them nervous. Their armor sensors were picking up strange electromagnetic fluctuations, and their communication systems were experiencing minor glitches. Nothing serious yet, but enough to make them check their equipment, kill him. Thorn ordered his patients, finally exhausted. This human boy had shown disrespect in front of witnesses, and that could not be tolerated. The soldiers raised their weapons, preparing to reduce Park Tae to ash with their plasma rifles, but nothing happened. The weapons refused to fire their targeting systems, failing to lock onto the human target. The soldiers pressed their triggers again and again, but the rifles remained dead in their hands. They looked at each other in confusion, then at their commander, who was staring at his own sidearm with growing alarm. Park Tae had not moved. He stood in the same spot with the same calm expression, but somehow he had reached into their weapon systems and turned them off. The boy consciousness was spreading through the station networks like water, through cracks touching every electronic component and making them his own. The lights in the corridor began to flicker, not randomly but in patterns that seemed almost like communication security doors sealed themselves with loud clangs that echoed through the station. Communication panels sparked and went dark before coming back online with streams of incomprehensible data. "What are you doing?" Thorn demanded, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. The commander was beginning to realize that he was dealing with something beyond his experience, something that his training had not prepared him for. Park Tae finally moved, stepping closer to the massive alien who had beaten his father. He had to look up to meet Thorn's eyes, but somehow it was the commander who felt small. The boy voice was still quiet, but now it carried an undertone of absolute power. "I am showing you what humans really are," he said. The words were simple, but they carried implications that made the watching crowd step backward. Aliens who had lived their entire lives believing in human inferiority suddenly found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew. The station around them was coming alive, responding to Park Tae will in ways that should have been impossible. Computer terminals throughout the complex began displaying his face. Security cameras turned to focus on the corridor where he stood. Environmental controls adjusted themselves to his preferences as if the entire station was recognizing a new master. Thorn reached for his backup weapon, a ceremonial blade that had no electronic components, but his hand froze halfway to the hilt. The boy's eyes held him like a physical force, making movement impossible. The commander found himself trapped by something he could not understand or fight. "This is impossible," Thorn whispered, his reptilian features twisted with confusion and growing fear. "Humans do not have this kind of power. Your species barely understands basic technology. How can you control our systems, Park?" Tai smiled for the first time since the beating had begun. It was not a pleasant expression. The smile contained knowledge that had been hidden for generations, secrets that the galaxy was not prepared to learn. The boy looked down at his injured father, then back at the alien commander. "You have no idea what we are capable of," Park Tae said softly. "You never bothered to find out. You just assumed we were weak because that is what we wanted you to think. Now you are going to learn the truth about humans and why we have been hiding." The breaking point had been reached. The careful facade of human weakness was cracking like ice under pressure. Park Tae had spent his entire life pretending to be something less than he was, but his father's blood on the corridor floor had shattered those restraints forever. Park Tae walked calmly to the nearest maintenance terminal, ignoring the weapons pointed at him and the growing confusion of the crowd around him. His movements were fluid and purposeful, like someone who had been waiting his entire life for this moment. The terminal screen flickered to life before he even touched it, responding to his presence with eager electronic whispers. Commander Thorne watched in growing alarm as the human boy approached the computer interface the commander had seen. Many species use technology, but nothing like this. The terminal was activating systems that required high-level security clearance, displaying data streams that should have been impossible for anyone to access, let alone a teenage human. "What are you doing?" Thorne demanded, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. The electromagnetic fluctuations were getting stronger now, affecting not just weapons, but the basic systems throughout the station. Life support, atmospheric processing even. The artificial gravity were all responding to fluctuations that seemed to emanate from the small human park. Tay's fingers began to dance across the terminal interface, but they moved far too quickly for normal typing. His hands were a blur as code, streamed across multiple screens simultaneously. Each keystroke seemed to unlock new levels of access, diving deeper into the station computer networks than anyone should have been able to penetrate. The boy was not just using the terminal, he was communing with it. His consciousness flowed through fiber optic cables and wireless transmissions, touching every connected device within range. The station networks opened to him like a book, revealing their deepest secrets and most protected systems within. Seconds, Park Tay had accessed security protocols, personnel databases, and communication arrays. His mind expanded through the digital infrastructure, mapping every component, every connection, every vulnerability. The station was no longer just a structure. Around him, it was an extension of his will. The crowd watched in stunned silence as displays throughout the corridor began showing impossible things. Security cameras revealed hidden compartments that even the administrators did not know existed. Financial records exposed corruption and illegal activities by several department heads. Communication logs displayed private conversations between species leaders discussing their true opinions of each other. But Park Tay was not finished with simple revelation. He began reaching beyond the station itself, following quantum communication links to the broader networks that connected this outpost to the rest of galactic civilization. His consciousness rode the data streams like a swimmer, moving through water, touching systems light years away. Thorne's soldiers were panicking now. Their armor had become unresponsive, the sophisticated combat suits reduced to dead weight. Their communication systems were either silent or broadcasting, incomprehensible static. Their weapons remained completely inert, no matter how frantically they pressed the activation sequences. The station lights began pulsing in complex patterns that seemed to follow some kind of rhythm Park Tay was conducting, a symphony of electronic systems orchestrating their responses to create something beautiful and terrifying. The very air seemed to hum with energy as more and more devices fell under his influence. Administrator Crix tried to reach the emergency communication system to call for help, but found that his access codes no longer worked. The Zentari administrator had run Colony Station Omega-7 for 12 years, but suddenly he was locked out of his own systems. The computer networks recognized only one authority now. "How is this possible?" Thorne whispered, staring at the displays that showed his own classified military records being accessed and analyzed. The boy had penetrated hegemony security databases that were supposed to be impregnable. Systems that required biometric authentication from multiple high-ranking officers were opening like flowers to his touch park. Tay paused in his work and turned to face the commander. His eyes held depths that seemed impossible for someone so young. The casual confidence with which he manipulated the most sophisticated technology in known space suggested capabilities that no species in the Galactic Union possessed. "Your people have ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years, Park Tay said, his voice carrying easily through the corridor despite its quiet tone. You conquered world after world, believing that superior firepower made you the dominant species. But you never understood what real power looks like." The displays around them began, showing historical records, battles from the great wars that had established hegemony supremacy. But these were not the sanitized versions taught in schools. These records showed the true casualty figures, the civilian massacres, the entire civilizations. That had been wiped from existence. You built your empire on the assumption that technology equals power. Park Tae continued, his fingers still moving across the terminal interface with inhuman speed. But technology is just a tool. What matters is who controls it. And you never bothered to find out what humans could do when we stopped pretending to be helpless. The boy consciousness was expanding further now, touching networks in distant star systems. Banking databases on the hegemony homeworld responded to his presence. Military communication arrays began relaying his signals to every corner of the galaxy. Supply chain management systems started revealing the true extent of corruption and incompetence in the galactic government. Thorn felt his personal communicator activate without his command. The device began playing audio recordings of his own conversations with other officers, discussions about human inferiority, brutal jokes about the species they considered barely sentient, recorded evidence of war crimes and civilian massacres that his unit had committed on a dozen different worlds. The commander reached for the device to shut it off, but found that his hands would not obey him. Park Tae had somehow taken control of his nervous system just as easily as he had conquered the station networks. Thorn's massive form stood frozen while his own voice condemned him from the speakers. Every screen in the corridor now displayed a different aspect of hegemony brutality. Historical records showed conquered worlds reduced to ash. Entire species rendered extinct because they had dared to resist. Current files revealed ongoing atrocities, secret prisons, and experiments on sentient beings. The galaxy was seeing the true face of its rulers for the first time. But Park Tae was not content with simple exposure. He began accessing the personal files of every hegemony soldier on the station, their service records, their psychological profiles, their family information. All the data that made them who they were began flowing across the displays for everyone to see. "We have been watching you for centuries." Park Tae said, his voice now carrying an otherworldly quality that made the listener's skin crawl. Every human, settlement, every colony, every individual has been gathering information, waiting for the right moment to act. You thought we were primitives, but we were learning. The quantum communication networks were fully under his control. Now Park Tae could feel the pulse of galactic civilization flowing through fiber optic cables and subspace transmitters. Every connected device, every database, every communication system was responding to his presence. The boy had become something more than human. He had become a force of digital nature. The other aliens in the crowd began backing away as they realized the magnitude of what they were witnessing. This was not just a human boy accessing computer systems. This was a fundamental shift in the balance of power that had existed for millennia. The species they had considered barely intelligent was revealing capabilities that made their own technology look primitive. Thorn tried to speak, to issue orders to his soldiers, but found that his voice would not work. Park Tae had taken control of more than just the station systems. He was manipulating the very neural impulses that controlled speech and movement. The commander was becoming a prisoner in his own body. The revelation was complete. The quiet human boy who had been ignored and dismissed by galactic civilization had demonstrated power that no other species possessed. Park Tae stood at the center of it all. His consciousness expanded across light years of space, touching every network, every system, every connected device in known space. The age of hegemony dominance was ending, and it was being replaced by something that the galaxy had never imagined. The humans had not been hiding because they were weak. They had been hiding because they were preparing, and now the preparation was over. Park Tae consciousness now stretched across the galaxy like an invisible web, touching every network, every database, every connected system that formed the backbone of galactic civilization. His mind moved through quantum communication channels, faster than light itself, accessing information that had been gathered and stored over thousands of years. The boy standing in the corridor of Colony Station Omega 7 was just the physical anchor for something far greater. His awareness expanded through layers of digital reality, touching banking systems on distant worlds, military databases in heavily fortified installations, and personal records stored in the most secure vaults of galactic civilization. Commander Thorn watched in growing horror as his own service record appeared on the screens around them. But this was not just a simple file access. The information was being altered, edited, deleted in real time. His commendations and medals were vanishing from official databases as if they had never existed. His rank, his authority, his very identity were being systematically erased. The process started small. Personal identification codes stopped working. Security clearances were revoked without explanation. Access to classified systems was terminated as computers throughout the galaxy decided that Vex Thorn no longer existed. The name was being deleted from personnel rosters, duty assignments, and pay records. Within minutes, the commander had become a ghost in the machine. His military identification showed error messages when scanned. His voice prints were no longer recognized by security systems. His biometric data had been purged from authentication databases. Officially, according to every computer system in hegemony space, Vex Thorn had never been born, but Park Tay was not content with simply erasing military records. The boy's digital consciousness dove deeper into the networks that governed daily life in galactic civilization. Banking systems reported that Thorn accounts had never existed. Property records showed no trace of his ownership of homes or vehicles. Transportation databases had no record of his travel permits or shipping licenses. The other hegemony soldiers watched in terror as the same process began happening to them. One by one, their identities were being deleted from every database in known space. Their families, their histories, their very existence were being systematically removed from the digital record of galactic civilization. Soldier, designation HG4471, tried to access his personal communicator to call for help, but the device no longer recognized his biometric signature. According to its memory banks, he was not authorized to use military equipment. The weapon he carried became dead weight as its security systems locked him out completely. Administrative databases throughout the galaxy began purging files. Personnel records that had existed for decades simply disappeared, leaving behind empty spaces where names and service histories had been stored. Payroll systems stopped processing payments to individuals who, according to their own records, had never been employed. Park Tay was rewriting history itself, using the galaxy dependence on digital record-keeping to erase his enemies from existence. The process was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than destroying the soldiers physically, he was making them invisible to the civilization they had served. The quantum networks carried his commands to banking systems on 100 different worlds. Thorn personal accounts, his savings, his investments all vanished as if they had never existed. The money was not transferred or stolen. It simply ceased to exist in the digital realm that governed galactic commerce. Legal systems began purging court records that mentioned the erased soldiers. Criminal proceedings that had established their authority to act as law enforcement were deleted from judicial databases. Marriage licenses that proved their family relationships disappeared from civil records. Even birth certificates were being systematically removed. The process accelerated as Park Tay consciousness expanded deeper into the networks. He was not just accessing existing systems, but creating new connections, linking previously separate databases into a unified whole under his control. Every piece of digital information about the targeted soldiers was being tracked down and eliminated. Commander Thorn tried to speak to protest what was happening, but his voice translator was no longer functioning. The device that converted his native reptilian language into galactic standard had purged his voice patterns from its memory. He could make sounds, but they were meaningless noise to everyone around. Medical databases were the next target. Health records that proved the soldiers' existence disappeared from hospital systems. Vaccination records that allowed them to travel between worlds were deleted. Genetic profiles that identified them as members of their species were purged from biological databases. The erasure was total and complete. Every aspect of digital civilization that acknowledged the existence of Thorn and his soldiers was being systematically removed. The process was happening too quickly for anyone to stop, even if they had understood what was occurring. Other species throughout the station watched in stunned silence as the hegemony soldiers became non-entities in real time. Their armor no longer responded to their commands. Their weapons refused to acknowledge their touch. Even their personal belongings seemed to reject them as unauthorized users. Park Tay was demonstrating the true vulnerability of a civilization built on digital infrastructure. Every convenience, every system Every method of identification and authorization depended on computer networks that could be manipulated by someone with sufficient knowledge. The galaxy had built its entire society on a foundation that humans could rewrite at will. The boy fingers continued their impossible dance across the terminal interface, but he was no longer really using the physical controls. His consciousness had merged with the networks themselves, becoming a living virus that spread through every connected system in known space. Educational records were purged. Next, academic transcripts that proved the soldiers had attended military academies simply vanished. Training certifications that authorized them to use advanced weapons disappeared from institutional databases. Even childhood school records were being tracked down and deleted. The process extended beyond official records. Social networks that connected beings across the galaxy began purging profiles and messages. Any digital trace of social interaction was being eliminated. Photos that showed the soldiers with friends or family members were deleted from personal archives. Communication logs that recorded their conversations were wiped from server memory. Within an hour of beginning the process, Park Tae had achieved something that no military force in galactic history had ever accomplished. The complete erasure of enemies without firing a shot, without destroying property, without harming civilians. He had made them simply cease to exist in the eyes of digital civilization. Commander Thorne stood in the corridor surrounded by his soldiers, but they were. Emergency klaxons wailed throughout Colony Station Omega-7 as the full magnitude of what had occurred began to register in computer systems across the galaxy. The alarms were not responding to any immediate physical threat, but to the massive disruption in data networks that formed the backbone of galactic civilization. 13 high-ranking military personnel had simply vanished from existence, and the automated systems were struggling to adapt. Administrator Crix stood frozen in the corridor, his forearms trembling as he watched the aftermath of Park Tae demonstration. The Zentari had governed this station for over a decade, following every protocol and regulation to maintain his position. Now he was witnessing the collapse of everything he had believed about the natural order of species. The human boy was helping his injured father stand, while around them the former hegemony soldiers remained motionless in their dead armor. Their weapons hung useless at their sides, their communication systems silent, their very identities erased so completely that they had become ghosts, haunting their own bodies. Reports were flooding in from across the sector and beyond. Military command centers were reporting massive database failures. Personnel systems were showing impossible gaps where records should have been. Financial networks were displaying error messages about non-existent accounts. Transportation authorities were canceling travel permits for individuals who, according to their own systems, had never been born. The quantum communication arrays were carrying the disruption to every corner of known space. Each connected system was discovering the absence of the 13 soldiers and attempting to reconcile the impossible gaps in their data. The erasure was spreading like ripples in a pond, touching every database, every network, every digital record in galactic civilization. On the hegemony homeworld, military administrators were staring at personnel rosters that showed 13 empty positions where elite soldiers should have been listed. The gaps were not recent deletions, but appeared to have existed forever, as if the positions had never been filled. The computer systems insisted that no one had ever been assigned. Those identification numbers. Bank executives on financial hub worlds were dealing with accounting anomalies, as credits that had been assigned to the erased soldiers simply vanished from the galactic economy. The money had not been transferred or stolen, it had ceased to exist, creating mathematical impossibilities that threatened the stability of Interstellar Commerce Park. Tai finally spoke, his voice cutting through the wailing alarms with calm authority that made even the non-humans listen. The boy looked around at the crowd of aliens who had watched his father being beaten, now seeing them with eyes that held knowledge accumulated over generations. You have lived your entire lives believing that humans were inferior, Park Tae said, his words carrying clearly through the corridor despite the chaos around them. You thought we were primitives who could barely understand basic technology. You built your civilization on the assumption that we were harmless. The former commander, Thorne, tried to respond, but his voice translator remained offline. The device that had allowed him to communicate in galactic standard now treated him as an unauthorized user. His attempts to speak produced only the harsh reptilian sounds of his native language which no one else could understand. We have been among you for centuries. Park Tae continued his gaze, moving from face to face in the crowd. Every human settlement, every colony, every individual working in your factories and cleaning your floors has been part of a larger network. You never noticed because you never bothered to look. The boy gestured toward the displays that still showed fragments of the massive data manipulation he had performed. The screens revealed the true scope of human presence in galactic civilization. Maintenance workers who had access to every system. Engineers who understood technology better than its creators. Service personnel who had been gathering information for generations. Kim Dae leaned against his son, feeling the weight of secrets that had been kept for so long. The old man had known about some of the hidden capabilities of his people, but nothing had prepared him for the demonstration he had just witnessed. His quiet teenage son had just reshaped the balance of power in the known galaxy. The other humans in the crowd were no longer hiding their abilities. Maintenance worker Min Ho stepped forward to one of the control panels and began typing with the same impossible speed that Park Tae had displayed. A teenage girl named Yoon Bi accessed a security terminal and began reviewing classified files with casual ease that shocked the watching aliens. Throughout the station, human workers were dropping their carefully maintained facades of ignorance. They moved with new confidence, accessing systems they had pretended not to understand, revealing knowledge they had spent lifetimes concealing. The transformation was happening everywhere as the need for secrecy ended. Communication channels throughout the galaxy were carrying reports of similar revelations on other worlds. Human servants were demonstrating capabilities that surpassed their supposed superiors. Maintenance staff were revealing knowledge of systems that their employers had thought secret. The comfortable assumptions about species hierarchy were crumbling everywhere at once. Station Administrator Crix tried to access emergency protocols to call for military assistance, but found that his authority codes had been changed. The human workers who had once deferred to his every command were now controlling systems he could no longer access. His own station was slipping from his control as the true power structure revealed itself. The former hegemony soldiers remained frozen in place, their armor serving as prisons rather than protection. They could see and hear everything around them, but could not interact with any technology, could not communicate with anyone, could not even prove their own existence. The ultimate warriors had been reduced to helpless observers. Park Tae walked over to where Thorn stood, trapped in his unresponsive armor. The boy looked up at the massive reptilian form with something that might have been pity. The commander who had brutalized an old man for the crime of existing was now discovering what true helplessness felt like. "You wanted to teach my father about knowing his place," Park Tae said quietly, only loud enough for the former commander to hear. "Now you can learn about yours. You no longer exist as far as civilization is concerned. You are nothing." The boy turned away from the trapped alien and addressed the crowd again, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had just demonstrated the ability to reshape reality. The other species listened with an attention they had never given to humans before. Their comfortable assumptions about superiority shattered forever. "This is what we are," Park Tae announced, gesturing to encompass all the humans present. "We have been hiding our true nature because we learned long ago that revealing it too early would lead to war. We chose to wait to learn to prepare until the right moment came." The moment had indeed come. The galactic community was experiencing a fundamental shift in understanding as they realized that the species they had dismissed as barely intelligent possessed capabilities that made their own technology seem primitive. The quiet humans who had served them for generations were revealed as something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Communication arrays throughout known space were carrying the news of what had happened at Colony Station Omega 7. The story spread from world to world, from species to species, as beings tried to comprehend the implications of what they had learned. Humans were not the helpless primitives they had appeared to be. The age of hegemony dominance was ending, not through conquest or rebellion, but through revelation. The true power in galactic civilization had always been hidden, serving quietly, and preparing for the day when concealment would no longer be necessary. That day had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same. As the alarms continued to wail and reports flooded in from across known space, Park Tae helped his injured father toward the medical bay. The boy had accomplished something that no military force in history had managed. He had ended the threat to his family without firing a shot, without destroying property, without harming anyone except those who had chosen to be enemies. The 13 former soldiers remained in the corridor, like statues wearing armor they could not remove, carrying weapons they could not use, existing in a world that no longer remembered their names. They had learned too late that there are forms of power that transcend physical force, and that underestimating humanity was the greatest mistake the galaxy had ever made.